interest in the 1960s, really. I've always had a real interest in that period in history. And one of the writers that I was reading at the time, actually a journalist by the name of Christopher Hitchens, who I know is a very controversial figure that a lot of people sort of, definitely, I definitely don't agree with everything the man said, but basically one of his topics that he loved to talk about was the idea of 1968 being the real sort of epicenter of the spirit of the 60s from a political standpoint, and the idea of a lot of people taking a lot of political agency in that time. So yeah, basically that was my first sort of interest, was presenting the film in the context of a sort of basically of this kind of very intense dramatic period in history. Yeah. And maybe you can explain how Ryerson kind of working together.
Yeah, so how it ends up coming together is in Ryerson, what ends up happening is all the people who go to Ryerson who want to write and direct their own stuff. And so in third year they make all the students who want to write something, they make someone else direct it. And so all the writers come up and they pitch their scripts to directors, and then the writers can also produce their scripts and bring people on and things like that. So I heard this story not knowing much about the 1960s, and I knew a little bit going in, but I didn't know that in '68, the year, the final push of the civil rights movement, was some of the highest times of violence in the United States, and that blew me away. And then I wanted to dive in and learn more.
Any other questions? Or
what was the most difficult part of producing the film?
Now, would you say production-wise or story-wise?
Well, either or both.
Okay.
I mean, I would say the ride sequence was probably the hardest thing to convince people of at the very beginning, because in the program, when I said I wanted to do a ride sequence, everyone thought I was kind of crazy. Calyx was the only one who was actually supporting me in the idea, but it was finding a period sort of space, and the idea was just fill it with people in a tight alleyway like that.
Yeah. Well, basically, the idea was initially, okay, so so the script as I presented it to Aaron was basically just the scene of the two characters in the alley.
Yeah, opens in the garage.
In the garage,
yeah. Starts in the garage.
And basically, I said to Aaron, Aaron approached me once, basically after we finished shooting that initial sequence, I think, and was like, I don't know, maybe. And it was like, I wanna, I want to do a ride. I want to show this, show the violence and really, have that. And I think we sort of decided together, if we're going to do this in a way that feels period specific, we have to just show a little sliver of that, just as little of that as possible, just kind of hint at things. So then the search was on basically for a narrow alleyway of kind of neutral brick that we could make work.
And it was a lot of days of just looking around, and eventually I hopped over one fence, and this was the alley I ended up using, so we went into a coffee shop.
It worked out really well. It
looked great.
For the choosing a kind of a narrow alleyway gives you that kind of claustrophobic, I've got nowhere to go kind of.
Yeah.
It worked out really well.
That's great. Thanks very much.
And then I'll just.
Sorry?
I like your use of close-ups in that too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'll tell you guys later, but funny story, the actor actually shot, the actor playing Jim actually shot 90% of the alleyway stuff. I'll tell you guys later. And then for story-wise, the most difficult part was figuring out how to end this movie.
Yes, that's a really good point.
Because there was dialogue we cut out at the very end.
We had them basically when they were when Jim helped up William, and they had that kind of final moment looking together. People kept saying, "Oh, we need that final thing. A statement needs to be said." And we kept trying to figure out what that was, what those final two lines would be. Maybe it would be some sort of, even it was a joke or it was a statement or something.
Yeah, and even to the point of Jim picking William up. How much the hand turns over and how much, and what are the body language is like to each other at the very end. Because that was we have one representation of both, of these both characters, and how do we do a statement about both of them by just their actions?
Yeah.
So that was.
And what's interesting though, I think, is that basically in editing was when we sort of finally figured out that nothing needs to be said, and it was really just that look and that moment between the two characters.
Yeah, which we found later on.
In editing,
which we cut out dialogue. Yeah.
Did you think of coming back to the riot material in the piece, or was Was it just a clean shot right at the front and then just audio after that?
It was, so the idea is it was supposed to be from Jim's point of view, the Black Panther movie. Like he's the one who's getting hit in the face and then people are running over him and things like that. But that was the initial idea, was to kind of front load it so that the audience gets like the headspace of these characters. But yeah.
I don't know if I would have let him do that.
Throw in riot sequences.
Throw in riot. Because I wanted to feel that feeling of when you're in there and that moment, and I wanted to almost imply. I felt as though if you showed it too much, you maybe you kind of. I think the audience could imagine. Maybe would be what the audience could imagine with the sound. Would be more powerful, and having things be implied as opposed to shown. I guess.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or? Yeah.
Yes.
What surprised you about making the film?
I have a couple things because
Sure.
this was probably my first real experience with a piece that I'd worked on, just handing it off to someone. Because usually I write and direct my own material.
He's proud to say he's a very neurotic
Very type A, yes. And so it was actually really, it was in a way kind of liberating, I guess, and also kind of is that, there were moments as a producer where I'm jumping in and I'm helping Aaron execute his vision and his interpretation of the piece, and it was surprising, I guess, because I guess almost how easy it was to do that. And it was difficult and it was easy in a way because one of the hardest things. It was difficult. It was a challenge for me to be like, here, you take this. But once I kind of got past that mind block, it was like, okay, he's got it in his hands, and I can just give that to him, So that was probably what surprised me the most, honestly. And also, what two really good actors can bring to a piece as well,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, and totally to go off of that, because in rehearsals, we actually kind of discovered how it would end by the two actors sort of like playing it out, and the actor who plays Jim in the film, like we sat down and we talked, and he talked to us about like, this is how I think this should go. And we had a very long discussion about it, and it ended up pretty much changing the end of the film and how it kind of went out. And so because during the blocking, that was probably the biggest thing to learn is, at the end of the day, when you get the actors together and it's something that's very political like this, it's good to sort of feel out how everyone's feeling about it and do a space rehearsal beforehand, because in a piece like this, how they react and act and move, especially with where we leave the audience off is what we're saying, is our theme, in their movement. So that was huge for us, absolutely.
Totally.
How long did it take to shoot and the edit? Once you turn on the camera to once you
Well,
pop it up?
if you talk actually working on it, I would say.
Well, let's just say the timeline. I think basically we started with the project in September of
2016.
No, 2015 actually. It's that long ago. Yeah, if you can believe that. So 2015, we started with the production and the writing. We finished shooting by November, and that was the main sequence. And then the ride sequence we finished in not too much longer after. It was December, I think, or something like that. So then we were kind of wrapped with that. The edit, I would say, maybe took probably just a few more a few more weeks, or maybe about a month, 2 months, something like that. And then the sound design, basically because we had other projects we had to focus on, we had other commitments, that ended up taking I would say almost a year and a half, maybe, or something like that.
I would say about 6 months. 6 months of going in and figuring out what sounds and all these different things to sort of, because for me the film completely changed once we had the soundscape in there.
Yeah, it was. I think the sound. The reason the sound took so long was because it was. I think it really drives the piece and motivates the piece, and I think without the sound, you kind of almost don't have a film.
Yeah.
I think with this particular film, so we worked with someone who was really good. Andrew Leonard was his name, and we were just we were all really nitpicky and really intense with what we wanted, and he was really intense with what he wanted. So Yeah.
And the crazy thing that he threw out was at the very beginning of the ride sequence, he put a underwater, like a heavy, like deep underwater sound for the whole ride sequence. Is why it's got that crazy bass, which is which is why which is something really cool that I thought I came up with.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What kind of research did you put in for saying writing the piece?
Okay. Well, for me, I just honestly I based a lot of it on Hitchens, I think, and just his writing and his kind of take on that time. As well, probably just it was a lot about I would say the movie Malcolm X as well. Films like that sort of touch on the Black Panther movement. I mean, it's hard for me to say research just because I'm sort of obsessed with the 60s and the spirit of the 60s.
Because you grew up reading it.
I just grew up reading a lot of it, so
learning about it. Yeah.
I didn't really like say, okay, I'm going to research this and this and this to make this piece. It was more like I've read things and I kind of have this understanding of what I feel I know of this time, and it was also just working with the professors and bouncing ideas off of people and stuff like that. But it's hard to really go to specific sources, honestly, except Hitchens, who kind of inspired the piece.
And yeah, Calyx also sent me links, and we were going back and forth for a very long time about like little articles and documentaries and video snippets and all these kind of things, and trying to always hone in on what was happening in that year, because there's the 60s was obviously.
There's a saying that people who lived through the year 1968 and who were young at the time, they called themselves a 68ard. And the idea was like a 68er, and there was this idea that they were united in this idea, this feeling that the world really could be changed, paradigms could be overturned at this time, and there was a very prevalent spirit, and those people who lived through that time still kind of stick with that, have that mentality, and still kind of remember that year is very crucial. So that was kind of the initial inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I see another hand up? Oh, yeah.
Is there anything in your viewing of it this time that you hadn't noticed before, or something that particularly struck out with you in this setting?
Like in the political setting we're in, today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'd love to hear what you think.
We shot this film before any of the we shot this film when Barack Obama was the president of the United States and Donald Trump was not even running. That's when we made this film.
This was pre-Trump.
This was
This was
pre
Charlottesville. This was pre a lot of. I think the Baltimore riots had happened, and that was it at that time.
Yeah.
And none of all this huge kind of overturn, and I think Black Lives Matter had either just started or, but we were making it in a very different context.
Yeah.
Ironically, a less relevant context.
Yeah. And that also created quite the inspiration, the hustle to get it done, get it out there. But it's hard to break it down to specific things, but it's just surprised by how the world's really blown up in the last few years since we started.
I mean, one thing I'll add is that you make a movie and you have to watch the movie. There's a saying someone said if you really love a movie, you really have to love the movie you're going to make, because you're going to be watching it 1,000 times over and over and over. And so I've seen it so many times at this point that I know every little movement and every little so it's hard. I think what's interesting and refreshing is always just feeling how the audience is receptive to things, feeling how people take the piece essentially. That's what's new about it.
Yeah.
It's always harder, though. I find it's harder with a drama, because with a comedy, you feel the audience's reaction, I think, a lot more audibly, because you feel the laughter, you feel the, whereas with the drama, it's if people are enjoying it, they're usually going to be pretty quiet watching it, so.
Yeah. I would say, too, that maybe at the time of when we made this film, there was this feeling, like the William character has in the movie, where this want to help, but almost kind of this fear to help and not knowing how to. And I feel now in the new political climate, we premiered this film down in San Francisco at the San Francisco Black Film Festival. And I feel there's more now than ever sort of people teaming up with each other to fight all sorts of battles, be it your own or someone else's that you agree with. And so maybe now there's more of a fight going on, and there's more of people actually working together because it's brought the fight to the surface, what's going on in the States. That's something that I've definitely noticed.
Or allies, I guess, is the buzzword
Yeah.
to use. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think you've chosen a perfect metaphor, 1968 as the pivot point.
Uh-huh.
And now that we're at another pivot point.
Exactly 50 years later.
Yeah. Can you see using the notion of 1968 in other projects and other work, and sort of staying with the theme of looking at then to think about now?
Oh man,
that's a amazing, awesome question.
yeah, it's an awesome question.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like I almost feel like the spirit of the '60s and '60s film and all of that. I sort of feel like that maybe pervades my my work in some way, just because it's so much part of my psyche. So I would say that's true, and I think just that idea of where we are and where we were. I mean, I think that's always a fascinating topic, you know.
So you're saying like maybe make a similar type of film for like modern day?
I think it's easier to understand today by looking at then.
Yeah.
Because we're in the middle of something now.
Yeah.
Back then it was there was a start and a middle. There was a notion of conclusion, of moving forward,
Yeah.
of change. It's hard now to see where the change is going. So I'm thinking using that in order to have us see this in other aspects, in other projects, if you're looking for work.
For sure. No, we'll definitely.
100%. It could absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great way to put that. I think. Yeah.
I think the themes will definitely stay, like in our work, like the themes of, the themes of teaming and allying and helping people and things like that will definitely stay, and that's for sure.
So who owns the rights, given that it was produced through Ryerson?
Oh, we own the rights. That's how
You
it
guys
works
own
at
the
Ryerson.
Thank God, too. Because,
But I wanted to comment on that was a great notion that you made about change and where it's going. I was just curious, like, did you have intentions to like make more films about that so-called change that is happening now?
Uh-huh. I almost think you can't really be, an artist creating something without doing that consciously or unconsciously. I would say maybe that's like a pretentious statement, but I think it's true. I think you reflect your times kind of just by proxy of being a product of the time you're living in.
and wanting to do change, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, I think, I definitely speak a lot about sexism and racism in my work, and that's not a conscious thing either. It kind of just happens.
Because of personality,
Yeah, I guess I just don't like injustice. Maybe.
But, I mean, for me, like, it's always been something in my life, and an interesting thing for me of someone with privilege helping someone without. And that root emotion is something that I definitely can see myself exploring more in my work.
Yeah.
Because it's something that I definitely struggle with every day.
Did you have another question?
I just wanted to say it was a nice piece of work. It was really clean.
Thank you.
I mean, the technology lets you do that, but all the decisions around that, like the soundscape, the lighting, the makeup, it was nice and clean.
It was stunning. You know what? Like I think this would be such a strong episodic. Like you could it left you wanting to see what's going to happen next.
Right.
Yeah,
You could
more
do,
than
like-
two guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I mean, like even kind of what you were saying is like we're kind of lending to if you're telling more stories in the 1968. Like 1968 is the name of the series, and then it's different instances.
Right, like a
Right. So it's like another maybe
like
it's
archival.
And then they all come together at the end.
Yeah,
All
right.
three
Yeah.
stories
That's
clash.
why I love panels of filmmakers.
Right.
Well, guys, we'll have a pitch session back in the hotel.
Anthology.
Or maybe there's a collection of filmmakers, each of whom contributed 1968. So that
cool.
it's an anthology of different takes on the
Yeah.
same four numbers.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. Okay, any other last comments? Maybe, or?
It was awesome.
Thanks so much,
Thank
guys.
you so much.
I like it.